For this session, I wrote 110 words. For this session, I wrote 87 words. It is Saturday night. I have been feeling a bit under the weather given the extremes of temperatures we've been having from the 80s to the 30s, but the Tylenol is helping. I've been working on my other manuscript, which is a young adult, maybe not young adult, maybe middle grade magical novel. I think it's really on the border of middle grade to young adult. It's hard to say because I feel like young adult nowadays has quite the spectrum in terms of themes. But anyways, it is a magical novel and I want it to be a little bit more on the cozier side, nothing really high stakes, but still a great magical story. I just thought of it. I think my story is more in the teen fiction category because I do want my main character to be in his late teens, but I'm still not sure if that places my story in the teen or young adult category because the themes are definitely on the cozier side. It's hard to say at this point, but I have now about 1,200 words in that manuscript going, and I can kind of now see more of the general direction that it's taking. I am a pantser, so I have no idea what happens in my stories until I sit to write them. I do have a loose sketch in my mind of what I want this novel to be, but nothing that I can really fully articulate at this point. I have been having a lot of fun writing this. This is definitely in a totally different genre than my primary manuscript, which is in the category of literary postmodernist-esque fiction. And then the second manuscript is definitely in the genre of fantasy. For this session, I wrote 120 words. For this session, I wrote 129 words. This morning, my husband and I went to the sauna to flush and detox and reset our bodies for the week. It felt very nice to get all of the gunk out of my system, especially since I have been feeling a little under the weather, but we're pushing through it. 'Tis the season and the right life continues. I am really happy with how my session turned out this morning, and it went so well that I thought, maybe I can do another session and write a little bit more, but then I decided against that and I just left off where I initially stopped. I'm also really excited because my second manuscript, which I still don't have a title for yet, the one I mentioned earlier in this vlog, the magical fantasy novel, that one is also picking up some momentum as well, and I'm very excited to work on that in the coming weeks. I've really refrained from putting any constraints around my second manuscript because I don't want to overwhelm myself with too many projects and too many commitments. But because I also still have a lot of aspects about that story I'm still piecing together, I don't want to completely dive into it fully yet because I can see myself definitely overthinking it and then kind of killing the joy. So, for example, I still don't know how old I want my protagonist to be, and I'm still fleshing out subconsciously his character. So far, I think I want my main character, my protagonist, to be an introvert, but that's also a very challenging character to write because introverts are more introverted characters. You kind of have to write more psychologically than you do in terms of action. But I also do want there to be enough action because this is a magical world and I have a lot of loose ideas of how I want the magical world to function, and I really do want to portray that. Writing stories with introverted characters are also challenging because you don't encounter that many other sub-characters or side characters, and so it can quickly become boring if you're not crafty about the scene setups and the interactions. So I'm still thinking about that subconsciously behind the scenes. This novel, I also am following a more traditional path, so I do want it to reach a broader audience, given that it will be a cozier magical story. And this is aiming very, very high, but the vibes I'm going for with this novel, the second novel, is like Harry Potter 5, 6, and 7. So there's still a lot to be worked out for the story, and that's why I'm keeping it kind of in the back burner so that I am not stressing myself out about it. But I will have to say, for the 1,200 or so words I already have down for this story, I am so proud of how it's turning out. For my primary manuscript, which is the manuscript that I've been writing in every single day that I have been vlogging about, that one I think is going to reach a more particular audience. It's not going to be for everybody. The themes are heavier, more philosophical, deeply psychological, and very explorative. So for my primary manuscript, it's definitely going to be for those people who love to read things that are against the grain and who really are seeking thought-provoking and challenging works. This is also why I write so little with my primary manuscript, because it is very difficult to write for myself given how heavy it is. And so for my emotional and personal psychological balance and well-being, I can only write very little at a time for this manuscript. Okay, let's talk about the cards I pulled today. I've got the Alchemist. I pulled the 8 of Cups. And from my Gentle Thrills Tarot, I pulled the High Priestess and the Emperor. Then for my Giant Rider-Waite-Smith Tarot, I pulled Death and the Knight of Pentacles. Over the weekend, I finished the Hotel Nantucket. Oh my goodness, this lighting is terrible. Okay, here we go. So I finished the Hotel Nantucket, and I have some thoughts. Let me just preface this book talk with some background context that I have been picking up some more books that are outside of my usual scope and genre, because I've been wanting to read more experientially, meaning, you know, I want to be able to be the person who can read any book that comes your way. When I'm like randomly out and about and I come across a book, I want to be that person who can read such book and create value and meaning out of it. Another way of framing this kind of experiential readership is intuitive reading. And intuitive reading is basically being able to be drawn to a book for no reason whatsoever. It's just being pulled into a book, and then even if it's not a perfect book or a perfect match for what you usually go for, to be able to still make it worthwhile. Personally, I think this is an important practice because I am of the belief that there is something to be gained in any book. I am of the belief that literacy is not just about reading certain kinds of books. It's about how one experiences the books that are available and creating magic with what's available. So let's get into the Hotel Nantucket by Ellen Hilderbrand. I drew the Queen of Swords for this book, and I think it's fitting because this book is written very bluntly, very directly. She doesn't really overly stress with her transitions, with her storyline. Like it's just on the paper. The words are on the paper, the story is there. By no means is the prose poetic or polished, but the story still works, and overall I enjoyed my experience reading this book, and I also did annotate. Here are my takes. I think overall this was a very, very, very compassionate portrayal about humanity. People are messy, people have various backgrounds, and overarchingly, I think this book is about grace for people learning through very complex and challenging life situations. I've mentioned this before that upfront the book does come across as gossipy, but I really don't think that's the intent. I think Hildebrand shows an incredible level of tolerance for people in messy situations, making mistakes, like really major F-ups, and still trying to become decent human beings despite a rather ugly history. I think implicit in Hildebrand's messaging in this book is the wisdom that despite past failures, disappointments, ghosts, so to speak, we have the option to either stay stuck in that or to move on and build the new. I think the advice to move on from our past can come across as a little callous, especially if you're someone who's more emotionally oriented. However, I do think it makes sense, and I do think it is sound advice. And personally, where I think this comes from Ellen Hildebrand herself is through her experiences of being a mother. People who are much more heavily justice oriented might be averse to such wisdom or advice under the argument that tolerance is too lenient. Justice-oriented people tend to want people to pay heavily for the mistakes they've made. Compassion-oriented people, however, understand that we're all human and fallible, and we all make so many kinds of mistakes in all different kinds of shapes and sizes, and sometimes these mistakes actually work in our favor. And this is also a premise of Hildebrand's messaging, that who is really to judge for another person's mistakes. So really, I do think that the Hotel Nantucket is really a book about grace for humanity, and personally it serves as a reminder to have more grace for people in this world, because people are messy, yes, but there are so many other wonderful, wonderful, wonderful aspects about people that we will miss if we only focus on what they're doing wrong. Ultimately, I do also think there is a message that everyone learns in a very individual way. There is no one-size-fits-all model for learning and personal growth and development, because we really do all come from incredibly unique backgrounds. On a final note, when we are talking about grace, we are also talking about the capacity people have for resilience. So when we extend grace to people, we actually support others in their resilience to then become better people. That is it for this vlog, and I will see you in the next one.